Hi, Aaron.
All right, let's give Aaron a round.
Great. How is everybody today? Good. That sounded rehearsed. Awesome. Yeah, let's pass these out. No simple way to do that other than to use the old fireman's method. My name is Aaron. I am working with the wine program here a bit, and I'm thrilled to be here, have the opportunity to chat with you, covering quite a bit of area, really. I'm going to try to condense as much as I can into the time that we have. And what I'm going to talk about today is pretty basic, wine 101, so to speak. It might be things that you're not familiar with. It might be things that you're super familiar with. It's hard to strike that chord of what you all know. So I went like right middle of the vein. So I'm not trying to condescend anybody if you know all of this or a lot of it, but I think it's important to touch base on it because it's not only instrumental in the food and beverage industry. I've been working in restaurants since I've been 14 years old and still in hospitality, and I love it. It's a real asset to know about wine. Number one, because you want to be the best representation that you can for the restaurant that you're working for. Number two, the more you know about wine, the more money you'll make, that's for sure, by selling that second glass of wine or talking about a bottle of wine that you can move into. And number three, it enhances the vibe of where you're working at. I mean, how often do you go into places and service could be fantastic, and but knowledge is not there, or vice versa, maybe knowledge is there, but they're too cool for school. It really just helps tie everything together. So with that being said, I'll walk through Wine 101. I'm going to start about 10,000 years back and just kind of very quickly walk to where we are today so that we can get to the wine list, the wine program, where we're at today, and then I really want to finish on how to taste. Liz had thought that it would be best for us to kind of walk through, once we walk through Wine 101, really how to taste wine. And I know a lot of you probably taste a lot of wine and drink a lot of wine, which is awesome. I think that's fantastic. But I want to get into some fundamentals that you might take with you anywhere you go work, or use them here at the Pier House, which is going to be fantastic, just like a nugget that you can put in your pocket. So what I did is I actually printed out all notes for the wines by the glass here. Those are getting passed out now. But we're going to walk through some programming up here on the screen. But then in about 45 minutes or so, whenever we get to the end of and begin tasting, you'll notice the very back sheet of that list that we passed out is what the Court of Master Sommeliers calls their blind tasting sheet, or deductive reasoning. That might be getting a little bit hot and heavy. I don't think so. Like, we all can understand the properties of wine. So by the time we start tasting, and I'll be working with you a little bit today with regards to rosé and sparkling, that's how we'll finish it off before lunch. But also next Monday and Tuesday, we'll go through white wines and we'll go through red wines. And not to like over geek out or get too deep on this, but I think it's important that we are able to at least understand the properties of wine, from acid, alcohol, sugar, new world versus old world, and etc. So you can kind of use that sheet as a guide when we taste to help you use deductive reasoning is basically what it is. After a while, you do this with enough wines, and we'll walk through at least 15, 20 wines that you pour by the glass, then you'll have a pretty good idea that if it's this color, it might not be that. And if it's this color, it might not be that. So there's some things that you can really kind of get to the meat and potatoes of. But let's buzz through the Wine 101 that we kind of put together, because I think it's important to understand, especially living in California. How many of you are from here originally? About half of you? Yeah, I'm out here because of wine country too. It's really important to understand when we get to the New World why the grapes are where they are planted here, and etc. So, by the way, jump in with any Q&A. I love Q&A. I love interaction. So if you have questions, or if I'm leaving something out, or you want to touch on something, I don't at all want you to like hold your breath. Please do that. So let's see where we start here. It's not with this dude. Zach Gala.
It's not.
What's his name?
Zach
Galifianakis. So wine basics, wine grapes, we really all understand this, right? Wine is what's referred to as a simple fermentation, meaning that it's all self-sufficient. This pulpy juice in here, usually about 80%, water is what turns into wine. So what actually happens, I think that we all know this, you've heard this old analogy of like how the fruit can fall off the vine and the bird can eat it, or the squirrel can eat it and get drunk. It's because the sugars in the middle of the grape, the pulp, interact with the yeasts. Yeasts are found on the outside of the grape, and on the grape skin. And what happens is that the simple fermentation that is self-sufficient is sugar plus yeast equals alcohol, which is fermentation, plus carbon dioxide as well, which is gas, right? It lets off a natural gas during this fermentation. So when you bring grapes into a winery and crush them, that's all you really have to do. I've had the opportunity to work 4 or 5 harvests around the world, so I get like a real good idea of what's going on. That's exactly what happens. They bring in their fruit, usually hand-picked if it's high quality. They crush them and they just leave them alone for a little bit, or they throw them into like a cold room and let them relax for a little bit and even chill down to kind of extend flavors. But this maceration starts happening almost immediately, and it's pretty interesting. By the time we get to how to taste wines later, it's really important that we talk about acidity and sugar and alcohol. None of the wines that we're tasting today are sweet, so I'm going to be really cautious with using that word sugar because it should really not be repeated to guests at table. I feel like people really have, I'll sidebar on that for a second, but people really have an odd feeling about sugar here in America. We're a nation that's raised on Coca-Cola and Sprite, but somehow when you get older and become adult, you're like, oh, I don't drink sweet wines because they're cheap and mass-produced, which is really odd to me. We associate that with being cheap and mass-produced, I think because, sugar can definitely hide flaws. And if you've ever drank like shit wine, you'll see that it's like loaded with residual sugar. And we as primates are like, oh, sugar good, like poisonous things didn't taste great, and things that had sugar in them were kind of okay to eat. I think it really is more like primal than we think. But we don't now, sugar's the enemy now, but I just wanted to touch on that quick. But also with regards to the acidity levels, it's really interesting because this is something to point out before we even start looking at maps, which is the closer that you plant grapes to the equator, the lower acid they'll be because it's warmer climate. These cooler climate regions that are further away from the equator in both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere get higher acid. That's why the northerly vineyards of Europe really tend to be crisp and lower alcohol and higher acid. But the closer that you plant to the equator, obviously, that's where the grapes get a little bit riper, more dense. The acidities go down, the sugars go up, they're high alcohol, they're full-bodied, and etc. So I just wanted to point that out. Why I point this out is because I know you're going through like tons of beverage stuff, but wine is literally fermented fruit, plain and simple, and then you condition it after that, whether it's stainless steel tanks or oak barrels. And beer comes from a starch mash. Sake, people think is rice wine. No such thing, right? Because sake comes from a starch mash, so it's technically in the beer family, but it drinks like wine, especially now that we're chilling it down a lot. So I think that that's pretty self-sufficient. With regards to the skin of the grapes, also what happens is the wine gets its color from the skin of the grape. So usually green grapes on the vine equal white wine. You don't leave that astringent grape skin too long. And then, when you press red grapes, the juice is clear, but you leave that in contact with the skins that are dark, and then it colors the wine. Sometimes that maceration period can be, in the matter of rosé, a couple of hours. Like you press it, leave it on there for a couple of hours, and then you rack that wine or that juice off that's already pink. But with Petit Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, heavy red wines, obviously you leave the juice in contact with the skins for quite some time. And as a matter of fact, if you're a schlep like me and you go to work for a winery, they're gonna make you do punch downs. That's they harvest the fruit, and then you gotta literally continue to punch that cap of skins down into the juice and help turn that red before you either fine filter or rack that off as well. So
Does it stain your hands?
Yeah. I sell a wine called Purple Hands. What does that tell you? That's exactly what it is. Those are harvest hands for sure. I love it. Liz, why is wine healthy for
Wine
us?
is healthy. Woo. I love saying that. Everyone's like, no, I'm not drinking. I'm like, that's fine, but if you do, choose wine. It makes you stronger, longer, and sexier. Longer as in your life. So, stronger probiotics.
Sexier in the way of beer goggles.
Yes. Probiotics found in fermented foods like wine can unlock more energy.
Yeah.
There are also other kinds of fermented drinks out there, and fermented foods like kimchi, they unlock more energy. Longer, studies show wine drinkers live longer than beer and spirit drinkers. I would have to look into the research of that specifically, but this is a really wonderful source that I love to use, Wine Folly. They have a lot of fascinating information, and I trust them. Sexier. How do I pronounce this again? The polyphenols.
Exactly.
The polyphenols in red wine may contain the secrets to staying young. Okay? It's out there. It's not solidified information, but hey, it'll make you smile when you drink that glass of red. So, something to share. All right.
So I'm going to really go through, some of you might nod off. I hope everybody's had coffee. They provided coffee here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But not
So,
wine. Not yet.
not wine yet. Yeah, well, what I really want to do, because this is super interesting to me, and like I said, just as a backbone of education, I think it's important to understand what has happened over the last 10,000 years. Let's say the second round of people coming out of Africa 80,000 years ago. By 10,000 years, this is the breadbasket of the Middle East. Everybody recognizes this, right? Because literally, Turkey, they call it Asia Minor. Everybody knows this, right? Because literally, this is the crossroads. You have Europe to the west, Russia to the north, China to the east, Africa to the south. So literally, this was as metropolitan as it gets. The culture goes back. They've found like 12,000-year-old buildings, and now there's all sorts of towns that are coming about that's like, whoa, maybe this is much older than we think, because originally we thought it was about 10,000 years back. Nobody's taken notes back then. There's no parchment notes to tell us. But what happened, basically, is we went from hunter-gatherers, but why did we settle here? Well, geographically, I just mentioned, this is the crossroads of the world, the known world, number one. And number two, does anybody know what they found in eastern Turkey that made people start settling down? Anybody? Wheat fields. Wheat fields. So with man going from hunter-gatherer to, oh my gosh, we have this crop here, let's stay here, and then began maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe 12,000 years ago, it could be 20,000 years ago, but probably not, because the Ice Age only ended 15,000 years ago. This was uninhabitable up until then. So we really feel like science, not we, I'm not part of the science community by any means, but no, like that's what science has landed on now. You know how it changes every couple of years? This is where we're at. So they found these wheat fields in eastern Turkey, and they're like, wait a minute, we don't have to run around looking for food anymore. We'll start cultivation. Not long after that, Vitis vinifera, the grapes. So how do we know this? Those wheat fields are still there, and the oldest settlements that we can find are around. But also in Georgia, about 40 years ago, in the 1970s, they found clay amphorae, which are wine vessels that were used to make wine buried in the ground that were about 8,000 years old. DNA testing right now is really, really amazing with regards to the wine industry, because you can say like, oh, Zinfandel, a grape that we all know, is indigenous to America. No, it's not. Oh, so they go back and test it to the boot of Italy. Absolutely not. Even though it's Primitivo there, and you can follow that lineage back to Croatia now, where they feel like it developed from a grape called Zelianz Kastelanski, and then went and got quarantined in Austria, and then made its way across the country. But you can really like use these. Another great example is Syrah. They're like, oh, Syrah's from France, right? Yes. Oh no, wait. Now we think that this guy Joseph Opherus brought it from Persia, which it probably did, because everything's from Persia, right, through this spread that we're talking about. And then they're like, nope, we can't find any evidence there, even though we thought it was from the city of Shiraz in northern Iran. Nope, it's from France, because they just can't find any more history back further east. So that's why when you hear about Pinot Noir as being French and Nebbiolo as being Italian, they just can't trace the lineage back any further. So the eastern shores of the Black Sea, they found evidence of viticulture, not only agriculture, but viticulture, which is really important. And of course, this was mixed with honey and herbs and spices and wormwood, but they were making wine 8,000 years ago, and that probably wasn't the very beginning. That's just the oldest that we found. So as everything kind of pushed west, the Greeks, we all know that around 1600 BC, really took the ball and started running with it. Lots of indigenous varietals that grow in Greece that you won't find anywhere else in the world. As a matter of fact, they don't work well. A lot of Greek and Italian varietals just don't seem to do well when you graft them and bring them into other areas, because it's such a unique topography. For sure, Greece got planted all throughout Crete and Santorini and Nausa, and certainly Turkey as well. There's evidence of winemaking certainly back in Lebanon. My wife was Lebanese. It's really cool. She was born in the Bekaa Valley, and you have Chateau Moussard on your list. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those vines are mentioned in the Bible. Obaiday and Merwa, which is a wine that you'll have on your list, which is from the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. It's really, really cool. You know, they were growing a lot of weed back then too, which is awesome. And then Israel as well. Egypt, evidence goes back to about 3000 BC, just so you're familiar. They found not only evidence of winemaking, and of course that fertile valley of the Nile Delta was much different. It's not the desert that you see today. It was much more lush. The climate was cooler back then, right? So it was a little bit different. And as a matter of fact, they've now even found evidence, as the earliest form of writing seems to be Egyptian, that they were literally labeling single vineyards well before the turn of the century as well, which is just crazy. So the Greeks were sailors, and what did they do? They continued this push west, right? Because this is where it was all at. So 1600 BC, grapes kind of spread through here. What happened? Who pummeled the Greeks? The Romans, of course, the lovely Romans. But I'll tell you what, they took the vine and ran with it, for sure. So the Greeks, I think, planted in Sicily at about 500, maybe 300 BC-ish. By 300 BC, 200 BC, Vitis vinifera had found its way to central Italy. Do we have that up there? Yeah. Brought it to Sicily in 500 BC. And then the Etruscans, which is a really mysterious but cool people, that's the birth of like art, culture. Didn't completely understand that, but winemaking really, really took off there as well. And then the Romans, nasty as they could have been, that was high culture, right? What did they do? They planted the rest of Europe. They conquered the rest of Europe. Everybody knows that Rome owned all of this land. Anything that touched the ocean was theirs. They pushed up further to the north. They pushed as far east as they could. And they went as far west as they wanted to. You know, they had some troubles with the Gauls and whatnot. So they really planted not only southern France, but all through Europe, the spread of Vitis vinifera happened. Spain had its problems because of the Moorish and Muslim culture, and they kind of kept bumping into maybe our equivalent of prohibition. But that's the basic spread of how the vine really kind of pushed east, because everywhere that you find the culture is where you'll find wine and man, which is cool. Agriculture, viticulture, all kind of walks hand in hand. Any questions on that? Any thoughts or questions? That's all pretty basic 101 as to how this all happened, which is pretty interesting to me. Great, so let's move on then. I think it's important that we talk about Italy and France. That's what Liz gave the direction that would be a great place. I know this looks really overwhelming. We won't go over all of these DOCs and DOCGs. Yeah, but I just want to point out why, number one, we're talking about Italy because there's some really cool Italian wines that will be on your By the Glass program, not only in the way of Prosecco, but Barolo, and then we'll touch a bit on France. And by the way, Italy and France always are at rivals with each other to produce the most wine in the world every year. Wow. So it's like Italy produces the most wine this year, France produces the most wine this year. There's no shortage. I know we think of like French wine as being like ooh la la, like rare and cool, and it is. It's all of that, but they make a lot of everyday drinking wine, and so does Italy. And I say this too, I love everyday drinking wine. It's like save the nice bottles when you're out eating and drinking and dining with your friends, but at home, you know, it used to be like go down and, you know, get your bucket and get your wine for the next couple of days. I drink bucket wine too, for sure. So Italy is absolutely blessed. There's veins of mountains that run from north to south, obviously, or I guess it'd be northeast to southeast to northwest. In the north, Italy is such a monster. I'm just going to break this apart quick, if you don't mind. The very easiest way to introduce Italy, because you can spend your life studying Italy. I feel like I break wine people into two different categories, like people who really know Italy and people who just have a handle on it, but it's like this beast that it's really hard to figure out. Why is that? Because they're so blessed with sunshine and mountains and the perfect climate that wine grows everywhere. So they've never really tightened up their wine laws like France has, like Austria has. California's pretty loosey-goosey, but some of these European countries really have such a stringent farming and wine laws that it's incredible. But the Italians, they're just like whatever, they love it. You know, sunshine, beautiful beaches, beautiful people, delicious wines, great food. The best way to break apart Italy would be north and south. The north is a little bit more refined. That's where we have Barolo, Barbaresco, Chianti, Brunello del Montalcino, like all up in the north here. Tuscany, Piedmont, and then of course Prosecco comes from the northeast, where you find this beautiful, beautiful sun-drenched vineyard. So to me, I think you could say that about the culture as well as food and as well as wine, that the north is a little bit more refined, and the south is a little bit more rustic, a little bit more country-esque. It's poorer for sure, and they make richer wines for certain. There's 20 different wine regions. This is probably a little bit too much detail, but Italy's very important And so is Sicily, as a matter of fact. I think that you're going to have some Sicilian wine on your list as well. This is a really cool area in Sicily, Mount Etna. This is a volcano that continues to erupt. They grow Nelello Mascalese and Nelello Cappuccio, which are a couple of indigenous grapes there. On the side of this erupting volcano, like literally, there's like lava not far from where these vineyards are. And Nero d'Alva's from there as well. So with that being said, that's Italy 101. There's so much to go over with regards to grapes, but I don't want to get that complex and that deep on this just yet, because we are going to be tasting next week, and we can kind of go into like the next layer, the next level. So let's poke over to
Real quick.
France. Yeah.
Colton.
Sorry, real quick.
Sure.
So, can you just name a few examples of wines like that come from the south of Italy, like how it compares to the north?
Yeah, like things that you may not hear of so well. Down in this area, like a Terrassi is a really, really spectacular wine that is being made. All the name places that people really know, obviously in Tuscany, like from the north up, is going to be Brunello di Montalcino, Chianti, Morellino d'Iscanzano. To the northwest is, Barolo, Barbaresco, all those Nebbiolo grapes, and to the northeast is Prosecco and a lot of Pinot Grigio. Cooler climate, more refined food, as a matter of fact. And then to the south, between rustic style wines from Puglia and Cambria and Calabria, as well as Sicily, they're just dense kind of farmer wines for the most part.
So they're not as well known.
Say that again?
So they're not as well known.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, not as well known, much more local. There's a handful of things that are making it out of here, like these wines that I was just saying, like the Nelello Mascalese that's coming off of the mountain of Etna in Sicily. Like that's kind of starting to make its way. I'll tell you as well, I've worked in Chicago and San Francisco, and I feel like a lot of people have really embraced Europe much earlier, Southern California, just as far as like people, out on the streets, like really into European wines right now, because we've been so focused on California for so long. It's really kind of interesting. Now people want Sancerre. Now people know what Provençal rosé is. I swear to God, like just 10 years ago, like pink wines were still scoffed at as well. So, did you have another question, or somebody else had?
Yeah, I wanted to know, taste-wise, what was the difference between the north wines and the south?
Oh, that's a great question. Number one, the wines in the north are a little bit more refined. They have slightly, I'm generalizing here, but slightly higher acidity.
Okay.
And this is a great tie into what I had said earlier about the further south that you go, closer to the equator, it's going to be physiologically riper wines. So the wines come across as spicy, dense, more red wines for sure, farmer wines, things that are going to go with heavy proteins. And to the north is much lighter Orvieto and Prosecco and wines that will work with the acidity levels being cooler, because cooler grapes tend to gravitate, cooler climate grapes that have higher acidities tend to gravitate towards those cooler climates. It's the chicken and the egg, like were those grapes there, they just through thousands of years of trial and error realized that these grapes work best on this hillside in this climate, which is a point to their cuisine as well, because everybody's heard this old saying, like if it grows with it, it goes with it. Yeah. It's like perfect, like anywhere that you go, like the acidity in Sangiovese and a Chianti is perfect with the acids in tomatoes and pizza. It's just kind of like that whole thought process tends to work really, really well. The Nebbiolo in Piedmonte smells and tastes like truffles, and then truffles are growing under the oak trees, and they hunt those out as well. And it just is such a perfect pocket of wines and foods that go really, really well together. Yeah.
Sorry to backtrack, but I think your second slide said something about you can make wine technically with anything, apples and
that's right.
Fruit. How come more people don't do that to be different?
Well, they do. The cider, for those of you that didn't ask, it's like, why is there not more things that are, but there's a lot of plum wines that are being made. There's a lot of ciders being made, but what really makes Vitis vinifera, which is this strain, the species of vine, like Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, those are all from the family tree of Vitis vinifera. But that's what makes wine so alluring and so special, is that wine grapes, those grapes that I have just mentioned, can smell and taste like anything from mushroom to truffle to baked pie, wet forest floor, brand new shower curtain. Literally. It's like, why do these grapes? Because none of those things are in there. When we're talking and tasting later and we're like, oh, we taste raspberry and strawberry, that's not to be confused, and I just want to be clear here. This is where I said I don't want to condescend anybody, but those fruits are not used to make wine. Wine is just like you crush it, you age it, you release it, or you crush it and you put it in a bottle and release it. Well, then why does this Sauvignon Blanc out of nowhere tastes like wet hay and Granny Smith apple and wet stones. I mean, because that's what makes this particular species of vine. As a matter of fact, by the time the Vitis vinifera strain made it to America, there was an inferior strain here called Vitis lambrusca. And it makes very foxy, unattractive, unsexy wines. And they were like, whoa, wait a minute. This French strain, or it's not really French, I guess it's European strain, came over, and it blows these wines away. They're super complex, they're super layered, they can smell like 1,000 different things from the time you open the bottle to the time you're finished drinking it. Wine makes food taste different, food makes wine taste different. You're with people that you love, friends that you like. It makes for such an experience that it's hard. That's why people have been writing about it for 2,000 years. You know, it's really kind of interesting.
So other fruits just don't have the capability of doing.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vitis vinifera
So-
is in itself, it's a ball of chemistry
awesome.
that we are still figuring out, and a part of that chemistry is us. Our preferences, how many taste buds are on our tongue versus other humans. You know, how are our olfactories working? How do we smell? And it also, you know, as Aaron said, it has so much to do with the climate and where it's coming from. So digging into a little bit of the history and seeing, for example, Italy, which is one of those really higher producers of wines, they have this mountain right in the middle of the country. They're doing something different on both sides. The northern area, going to be cooler climate. Generally, cooler climates are going to have a little more refinement, a little more acid. So you might hit more citrus notes, or you might even taste salt water in your wine. Versus when you get into southern regions, all that ripe fruit might bring out more things in the soil. So you might taste like you just licked a rock, or you might really taste like some of those truffles or compost even. It all depends on, you know, this specific species, and also the chemistry that's happening, not just where they're growing, but what they've experienced and how we experience them. So that's really the beauty of wine right there.
And thousands of years ago, people obviously recognized how precious this was and captivated it, cultivated it, and has been producing ever since. And that's kind of a great question, because that's what makes wine so special as opposed to other fruit fermentations or beverages. There's such an area of place. And obviously, can't help but talk about Italy unless you see like what we're talking about here. I mean, we've all
Has
seen
anyone
pictures
been
of
to
Tuscany.
Italy?
So like blueberries
You
or
have?
raspberries or apples. Just
Okay, has
not
anyone
different.
gotten a chance
exactly
to
right.
see some of the vineyards?
I did a food and wine pairing class in Italy.
Oh, wonderful. Where
Oh,
were
wow.
you?
I lived in Florence, so I went around a lot of Tuscany.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, that's a special area for sure. Why'd you come back?
Study from.
Oh, I see. All right. So that's Italy 101, and trust me. Oh, you have another question?
Just quickly, as far as the DOCG,
Yeah.
is that just their method of
Yes, absolutely. So they've.
explaining that?
So yeah, Italy, their wine law is pretty interesting. It's been changing forever. I had mentioned that they were really, really relaxed for a long, long time about, oh, we don't care, it just grows here, it just grows there, like you can call your wine. Italy's so confusing because on the label, it could be, you see this word you don't understand. Is it the name of a grape? Is it the name of the producer? Is it the name of the region? Or is it a proprietary name like Sassicaia that is none of the above? It's very, very confusing. So they don't have their laws as laid out as it should be with some other countries. Sorry, tell me the question again.
So is it just the seal?
Oh yeah, no. What it is? So a DOC is an area that they say like these grapes need to be planted in here. Like DOC Chianti Classico, Denominazione di Origine, DOC means that these grapes come from this area, and we're not given like a bunch of stuffings from some inferior area, such as the South. That's exactly what happened in Burgundy like 100 years ago. They were making these, Burgundy had such a reputation, but it later was found out that they were importing Syrah grapes and these other grapes from like northern Africa and kind of putting them into their wine. So there was just, no rhyme, no reason. So people started really paying attention to this. Believe it or not, the first people who really started paying attention to that was in Hungary about 300 years ago. And they started saying, no, these grapes have to be grown on this plot of land. You cross the line, you're not in this plot of land. You cross this, you are. And now Burgundy's well known for it because it's like, oh no, Burgundy, Puydini Montrachet, Falatière, it must come from this plot of land. They call it Or Place. It's like Earth, Europe, France, Burgundy, Puydini Montrachet, Folatier. Like it has to be from right here, and it can't be any of the inferior grapes that we haven't discussed. So DOC, that's a DOC, which is pretty easy to get, but it's just saying like, hey, this is the best representation that these grapes do well on these hillsides. DOCG, Denominazione di Origine Garantita, that's a guarantee. They're saying at the end that G means guaranteed. That means that not only have we said that these grapes come from this hillside, but it says it's going to go through a tasting panel as well. Is this a good representation of this Brunello di Montalcino from Tuscany? Yes, this is what's going on here, and now it's a DOCG. So they're just kind of trying to up their game.
Are there a lot of copycats or people just trying to, is that, like, why would they be so strict?
Well, it's to control a lot of, in Italy, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. I want to make my wine this way, I want to make my wine this way. So at the end of the day, in order to make it well-rounded for everyone, and especially export and for people that are become interested in Italian wines, it's beneficial to have those labels and those rules, so that if you do live, in a specific region, and you've got your guy next door who doesn't live in your region making the same wine, well, then you're still going to get the DOC and possibly the DOCG.
Yeah, and this has been worked out for a long time. And by the way, in like 1970, the Goria laws, when they first started getting serious, so that's out of the 2,000 years of history that we've just mentioned, like all of a sudden they're like, no, we'll get right on that. So, sorry.
Something important that I noted when I was in Italy that I was taught is that the price of the wine doesn't always dictate the quality of it.
That's such an awesome idea, and it is quality control, but also knowing that that's a DOCG wine, they will get more money for it, but the woman in the back just made a great comment, which is the price of the wine does not dictate the quality of the wine. It can definitely, help with like prestige and, Grand Cru Burgundy or Champagne or Bordeaux, but at the same time, it's more market driven. Wine is a supply and demand market. That bottle costs that much because that's how much they can retrieve for it in the marketplace. Sake is much different. Daiginjo sake, like the cost of the bottle is what it costs to make the sake because there is no Robert Parker for sake.
So as far as denomination of origin, like DOCG goes, is that also specific to the species of grape? So it's like this wine can only come from this area and come from this grape?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it can't be another, they don't use anything other than Vitis vinifera, and they're using all of these indigenous, there's probably 300-400 indigenous varietals of grapes just in Italy alone. They don't do well outside of Italy. I know a handful of people that try to make Italian wine in California. You won't find anybody making Greek wines in California. Nobody's planting Acertico or Ardani or Moscafilero. They just don't do well outside of these areas. They're so unique. They're so specific. They are wines that are great representation. They can, like Liz said, they can smell like the area they're from. They can smell like sea salt, real briny. It's very, very cool because cross agriculture is another thing. Even in Australia, where they plant a lot of Shiraz, they might have all these indigenous eucalyptus trees, and that's why blueberry-esque like Shiraz from the Barossa Valley or from McLaren Vale might smell a little bit minty. Like that's cross agriculture. Same with we were talking about like the truffles in Italy. It's really interesting, how the whole earth is like an organism like that. It's like a microorganism. It's really cool.
The DOCG, is that information on the bottle or?
Yeah, in very, very small print. Nobody's going to be asking you about that. But yeah, all of the hot dog, big wine areas like Barolo, Barbaresco, Chianti, and Brunello di Montalcino and all this, those have DOCG status, a lot of DOC, but there's a lot of ins and outs.
So you spoke about these denominations, origins, DOC, DOCG. Can you speak really quickly on IGT points?
Oh yeah, that's important too. So with all of these laws coming into place, obviously everybody's like, hey, button up everybody now. What happened, because it causes a lot of animosity too. Sometimes I've seen this happen in Germany where it's just like, oh, we drew this line. What, my friend across the street's not gonna get this and you're telling me this? It causes a lot of disruption. So that's why Germany's been rearranging their laws again and again and again to make everybody happy. But the IGT wines are really interesting because there's some people that are total rebels that have said, you know what, DOC, Vino Tavola, DOCG wines, like I'm not doing this. I'm not going to plant the grapes. It doesn't mean that you can't sell them, but you just can't label them with that prestigious DOCG status. So I think what the gentleman's referring to is some people are like, you know what? Forget it. I'm planting French grapes here, which was blasphemy back in the day. French grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah, those grapes, like I said, are kind of from France. But then people, Italians are very, very much so like, no, Italian grapes here, don't let foreign grapes be planted here. It's not part of our history. But that fight has happened so long that I think the Sassicaiyas and the Ornellayas, people are like, nope, we're going to do in this little pocket of Tuscany Bordeaux-style blends where we're mixing Sangiovese and Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. They even allow now in Chianti Classico, I think you can allow like 10 or 20% like other varietal, and that means Syrah. There was a lot of hoo-ha about 10 years ago, like #1 Wine Spectator wine, Brunello di Montalcino, 100 points, and #1 on the Wine Spectator list. But then they started combing through and they're like, wait, there's a lot of Syrah planted in with this, and more so than is permitted. So now there was this big stink. I don't remember what the outcome was, but it was like totally exposed, you know what I mean? Like an Aaron Brockovich moment where they're like, wait a minute, there's a bunch of Syrah in these vineyards, and kind of, like that stuffings that you might say like, oh no, this is Morellino Descanzano. Wait, it's 25% Syrah, so it tastes much better. So they're just trying to, it's quality control. Back to the question earlier, like it's quality control. But the people who said, forget it, that's like an IGT wine, is just a wine that's not so, it's not within the laws and the boundaries of the DOC or the DOCG, so they can't release it as that, but they're just kind of saying like it's really swimming upstream, and some of those wines are now some of the most expensive wines in Italy too.
What does IGT stand for?
Indicazione Tipica. Yeah. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. So should we move on to then France?
Let's move on.
France is the motherland, in my opinion. Everybody tries to emulate French wines. Everybody does. From Champagne to Burgundy to Bordeaux to the Rhone Valley, it's all kind of referred to as that. So really the French AOC kind of started down in here, which is their governmental laws that they use, the Appellation de Contrôle, which is back in the 1930s where they first started saying, again, because there was so much inferior fruit coming up from Morocco and Syrah, or Algeria, I think it was, that kind of came up, and they would kind of fill, they'd say like, no, we're Burgundy, we're Gevrey Chambertin, but half that wine could have been Syrah from North Africa, which is interesting. But this is really kind of like a perfect way to talk about a lot of the grapes that you might be more familiar with, because obviously Champagne in the north, sparkling wine that's made in a very specific method, you can only call Champagne if it's from Champagne, right? We all know that. Alsace is right here. This is a very interesting area. Obviously, check out how I'm talking about how light and crisp and beautiful these wines in the north are, again, and then in the south is where you get into Syrah, Mourvedre, and Grenache, and Cabernet Sauvignon, and heavier, like richer red wines for sure. Alsace, that's a very, very cool area. Never gets the recognition that it needs. It's gone back and forth in between Germany and France, I think, like 6 times in the last 300 years, obviously after World War II, because these Vosges Mountains, really it's much closer. I don't know if you've ever been to Germany in that area, but it looks like it's a continuation of Baden in Germany. So it's pretty interesting. But Alsace, you can really, again, only produce wines from Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, Muscat, and Riesling. And then there's a little bit of like Sylvaner and a couple of other things here. Burgundy, like the beautiful, beautiful Burgundy. If it's white, it's Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. If it's red, it's Pinot Noir. And it really is difficult to understand Burgundy unless you go there. I can only describe it as like a quarter pike. It's a perfectly situated east-facing hillside that runs for miles and miles, that the sun comes up in the east every day, and just a beautiful exposure to what's going on with physiological ripeness. So they just kind of cook in the sun all day long, and then at nighttime it's perfect, but it is a perfect, gentle slope, all of it east-facing, catching that sun every day, which is pretty amazing. Any thoughts on that, Liz, or should I just keep kind of buzzing through, just a quick 101?
I think one of the things I always find amazing about Burgundy is it is really just a hill. It's very small. Like you can bicycle all of it, or you can take the train and it stops like every 2 or 3 minutes into these little areas. So it looks large on a map, but in fact it's just very, very long and narrow. Really incredible.
Well, the most prestigious, the most expensive wines in the world. I was just in a wine shop, I swear to God, current release Domaine de la Romanée-Conti for $13,000 a bottle. I saw that this week at Wing Hop Fung, like in the east. But this most prestigious area is up here, just outside of Dijon. But then you have the Côte Méconnaise and the Côte Chalonnaise and Beaujolais as well. So there's other areas that aren't quite as sexy as the Meursault and Puligny
They
Montrachet.
still do their own things. Pretty incredible stuff.
That's right. And then down here, obviously, this is a really interesting area for rosé wines. But really in this whole area, the Languedoc-Roussillon, they're making anything they want to, from sparkling wines to white wines, rosé wines, red wines.
I don't know if I'm going too far ahead with this question, but as far as like breaking down the region of where the wines come from, what's the difference between like a vineyard that's over there and a vineyard over here? Like if they're going the same grapes, like the taste, and like how do you get that like?
Oh yeah, well Burgundy is the perfect area to describe that because I could be in the village of Meursault right now. It's literally so instrumental that you're within the right parameters of the slope of the hill. If you're too high up in the hill, inferior. If you're too low down on the hill, inferior. There's a really famous Grand Cru vineyard site called Clos de Tart, and it was kind of divided into 3 areas, and the joke was, for kings and bishops and everything back in the day, that the top of the hill was okay, the bottom of the hill was for bishops, and the middle of the hill was for bishops, and the bottom of the hill was for growing beets, and it was like for the farmers. You know what I mean? Like it's that specific. Literally, from me to you, there is a huge, huge difference in how the quality of the wines, solely based on not only the very, very specific soil type, but the slope of the hill and water retention as well. Yeah, so Burgundy, it really, really matters. You can be in the village of Meursault and you're standing in between a couple of single vineyard sites of Premier Cru value like Porizeau, Charme, and then literally on the other side of that road, it's not very highly respected at all. So that's why they have to make those lines. They have to delineate very, very clearly, like if you're in this vineyard site, you're gonna get twice as much money as though if you're across the street in that lower level vineyard site that's a little bit more, it's just inferior. Yeah, it's crazy how nuanced it can get. And there's no better example than in Burgundy. It's really interesting, north to south. I could talk about Burgundy for an hour because it's endlessly fascinating, but literally I don't want to put you to sleep. Rosé wines, white, red, sparkling, everything. Bordeaux, of course, everybody knows Bordeaux, right? Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, maybe a little Carmenere and Pécheron, which is a little bit east. White Bordeaux, Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, and a little bit of Muscadel. As you get in here, it gets a little bit, this little area, as you get in a little bit closer here, gets a little bit more humid and hot, and that's where you find Sauternes and the little satellite appellations of Sauternes like Montbazliac and Cadillac and Lupiac, just like great little sweet wine appellations. And then, of course, the Loire Valley, very, very important. It's like a 650-mile river. It's the longest river in France, and it's absolutely the most diverse, for sure. If I could drink like out of one region for the rest of my life, it would probably be the Loire Valley, because you have everything from beautiful sparkling wines, bone-dry white wines, off-dry white wines, sweet white wines, rosé, red wines, and they're stunning. There's very, very cool stuff happening there, and it's, rather than me try to dissect it, just know that it's a lot to go over. I'd love to chat about it, but I want to keep it moving, but it's really, really cool. So that, for the most part, yeah, cooler whites and reds, Burgundy, perfect. A little bit more respect goes to the red wine down in the south, because, again, we're closer to the equator, physiologically warmer, riper, red wines. Burgundy, beautiful. So this is the West Coast. Where do we start here? So I guess to continue the westerly push, there's really 2 main ways that grapes came to America and California. Let's talk about California specific. Obviously, we're going to get in depth here with California, which is really, really important. I know that, I come from like Chicago, where it's like very, very, like all the European chefs kind of stop in New York and Chicago. So you're always talking Europe and always talking Europe, but I really wanted to move out here so that I could just immerse myself in California, because it's really pretty incredible. But with that being said, the 2 main ways that grapes came over here was, number 1, in the 1700s, actually 1600s, the missions and the mission grape, which the mission grape came from Spain. Does anybody know about the missions and the mission grape? It's part of California history. I think we're all pretty familiar. Yeah, so with that being said, the mission grape was brought by the Spanish and then kind of came up through Mexico, what is now Mexico. And it's really cool. These areas, you might think like, what's going on? Like New Mexico here has been planting grapes since the mid-1600s. Texas, first vitis vinifera grapes in the 1600s as well. And Southern California was way further along than Northern California. All the respect goes to like Napa and Sonoma for the most part, but SoCal was way far ahead. We even work with one vineyard site right now that's in Rancho Cucamonga, believe it or not. It's a 100-year-old vine, Zinfandel. It's right on the corner of like the 15 and the 215. Like if you drive to Las Vegas, it's like right out there. There's really old vines that, what do you think is the biggest problem with that? It's definitely urban expansion. They're crushing them. Like a vineyard site that you're gonna make pennies here as opposed to building, these new townhomes or this new subdivision that you're gonna make, 100 times the money. It's pretty incredible. The other way that things came about was from the gold rush in the was that 1800s? Yeah, 1849, obviously the gold rush. Zinfandel is really heavily planted in Northern California. Lots of 100-year-old, 120, 130-year-old vine Zinfandel. Lots of Italian immigrants that brought that vine. Started in Croatia, went to Italy, and then kind of really like the unsexy way to talk about Zinfandel is that it all kind of came through New Jersey. I mean, that's not sexy, right? But it did. All those immigrants kind of came through and then brought their vines. Everybody, whether you were from Germany, which the Germans really settled heavily in Napa Valley, where you'll find Krug. The Italians settled pretty heavily in what is now Sonoma County, where you find people like Sebastiani. And it's pretty interesting in that way. So we've really been making wines here for a couple of 100 years, but obviously with Prohibition and everything that happened, there's been a lot of problems along the way. With that being said, do you have any questions just yet? No? Feeling good? So touching on the West Coast, we're going to get more in depth here in just a moment with regards to California, but also you have a couple of Oregon wines on the list as well. So I think it's really important just to touch on Oregon. Oregon, the Willamette Valley, just about 45 minutes south of Portland. You now see the Umpqua Valley and the Applegate Valley and the Rogue Valley. There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening up there. That's really only been making Vitis vinifera wines, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for like the last 50 years or so. David Lett, God rest his soul, he just passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a really interesting dude, hippie, mid-60s, planted Pinot Noir for the first time in the Willamette Valley. It's a perfect little area of valley up there, the Willamette Valley is, and that is, it's really two main soil types. There's actually three, but the two main soil types are the Jory soils. These are all volcanoes that have been erupting 10, 15,000 years ago, which is, or 10, 15 million years ago, sorry, 10 or 15 million years ago. And then closer to the ocean, you'll find sedimentary soils as well, which are 200 million year old fossilized seafloor that's been, chalk and limestone for the most part, high alkaline soils.
What was the first soil?
Oh, it's called Jory soil. It's very unique, Jory. And it's actually some of the newest earth in the world, some of the newest topsoil in the world. Even though the oldest soils are in Australia, some of the newest soils in the world are up in this area as well. So it's kind of interesting. Pinot Noir, everybody knows Oregon is well known for Pinot Noir, and then they couldn't figure out for a long time why they were not able to produce Chardonnay in the same quality as Pinot Noir. And that's because they just had the wrong clones planted, for sure. But they've got that figured out now. So really Pinot Gris, and you have an Oregon Pinot Gris by the glass, which is delicious, does pretty well, but Chardonnay never did. So Oregon Pinot Gris kind of came up with the Pinot Noir just until like the last maybe 15 years or so, they really started dialing in as well. Washington's super cool. If I really wanted to put you to sleep, I'd tell you the story of the Missoula floods. If anybody's familiar with how these floods at the end of the last ice age really shaped the whole topography of eastern Washington and also the Willamette Valley as well. Endlessly fascinating. And then now who's jumping in the game? Idaho, Snake River Valley. There's an AVA called, who settled up there? Clark and who? Well, Lewis and Clark AVA. So there's a lot of stuff happening. All 50 states now are making wines, but California is super dialed in. And of course, in California, it's not so northern, southern, because we're blessed with sunshine. Like we have so much sunshine that we'll never be hurting to physiologically ripen fruit at all. Europe is much different because in Europe, the northerly vineyards, you can't physiologically plant any further north as where we can plant all the way up into even Canada and the Okanagan Valley. They're just like, there's no limit to what we can do on the West Coast here, for sure. But Europe is much different. Germany, Champagne, those are cooler and crisper styles of wine. So California has their own zoning classification, Region 1, Region 2. It's all pretty warm climate to me. But in the areas that they say are cooler climate, it's obviously Carneros and the Arroyo Grande Valley and the Willamette Valley up in Oregon and the Sonoma Coast as well. Did you have a question?
Yeah, do we make ice wine in America? Or Canada?
That's exactly right. But it's not up here though. The ice wine, he asked if they make ice wine in Canada because it's much colder. But believe it or not, they don't make it up there. They make it by Michigan, like Pelee Island and the Niagara Peninsula and whatnot. And that is ice wine. That practice comes from Germany, where literally what's really cool about that is that if you're right on the cusp of where you cannot physiologically ripen fruit any further north, and you can find that area, like you can't plant grapes any further north, a really unique thing needs to happen, which is the grape needs to get physiologically ripe and ready for picking, and then it needs to freeze in what's called basically aspersion, which is the grapes get surrounded by water and freeze, and then you literally harvest those in like January, and you press those frozen grapes, and what that does is it makes it super, super sweet. So it's a dessert wine that you'd have with like a cheese plate. For sure. So isn't it interesting? The weather patterns definitely move from west to east, or they seem to, because if you take this area over here and you go all the way over here, you can't do what they're doing on the west coast in Nova Scotia. This was told to me years ago, and it kind of stayed with me, so I'm going to share it with you. It's kind of interesting. The weather patterns move from west to east. So we're getting nice cool breezes, but we're literally physiologically warm, but we've got a lot of ripeness, but also a cool climate. But on the other side of the country, it's a little bit different, and here's why. The Earth is about 24,000 miles in circumference and spins at about 1,000 miles an hour. That's how we get our 24-hour day, right? 24,000 miles around, spins at about 1,000 miles an hour. That's our 24-hour day. Weather patterns, accordingly, are moving from west to east. And as a matter of fact, you couldn't really, this is how we help Europe, you couldn't really make the same styles of wine in Europe unless you had help from our Gulf Stream. Literally, really, really warm pockets of air go from the Caribbean in the jet stream to Europe. So Europe can plant much further north because they have the warming climate coming from the Caribbean all the way across the Atlantic that helps them to get physiologically north. So therefore, Europe is a little bit more finessey. It's cooler. Like if you were in Europe, but the same latitude, but actually planted in America, you'd be on the eastern seaboard of Canada in places that you just can't physiologically ripen things. That air gets too cold moving across the continent, as opposed to the warm air that's going from the jet stream straight northeast over the Atlantic to Europe. And I always thought that was really interesting. But that's why it's so finessey and beautiful. Their wines, there's more of a diurnal swing in Europe. You can have 50-degree diurnal swings. It can be 90 degrees in the day, and then at night it goes to 60 degrees or so. I mean, you can really have that. So you get the physiological like sunshine and the ripeness in the day, and then at night it goes really, really cool, which kind of shuts down the vine. It helps to build acid. It retains a lot of nutrients that way, and it's pretty special. So any questions there? I feel like we all know California because we live here. I feel like I live in wine country. At any afternoon you feel like going to jump into the vineyards and head up north, you can do so. So it's pretty special.
So is there like a specific reason why the East Coast, which has a lot of the same sort of like climate that we do, or similar-ish
It's
climate?
colder. Think about DC.
Yeah.
You know, DC and Boston, you can't do it. They tried to plant grapes in Virginia. You know, Thomas Jefferson was such a wine connoisseur. He kept trying Monticello? Yeah, Monticello. Like he tried again and again to try to get Vitis vinifera to work there. He tried to get Vitis lambrusca. Now, Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley is kind of coming up. You know, they're making some, I wouldn't say world-class wines, but they're making some pretty cool wines. And with that being said, here's like my Cliff Clavin comment of the day, that I think the first place they ever planted vines, the first area that they had any success was in St. Augustine in Florida.
Yeah.
You know, they were trying. They tried. That's an old city. I think that's the oldest city in our country, as a matter of fact.
It is, yeah. Where I'm from.
Yeah. So with that being said, in the north, Sonoma County, cooler as it's closer to the ocean. Napa Valley is one mountain range in. The Mayacamas Mountains create a little valley in between the Bacchus Mountains and the Mayacamas Mountains. So that's a little. Here's an interesting thing about Napa Valley. The only wine region that I know, as I keep talking about how the further north you go, the cooler climate it gets, and the further south you go, the warmer it gets. Napa's different. It gets stuck in this little pocket. So this is actually the area in the north that's warmer, And then you get cooler with this San Francisco Bay leads into the San Pablo Bay, and then Carneros, that cool weather pattern kind of moves in, like I said, from west, pushes east and does really well. But we all know some of these familiar terms: St. Helena, Oakville, Rutherford, Yountville, the most expensive wines from Napa happening now. And we'll get more into that. Like I said, I'm just trying to like super glossy over everything, and then when we're sitting down in groups later today and by next week, we can hammer out some real detail for those that have interest in that. I definitely have interest in it. I love it. I love it. So with that being said, what we're going to do now is move into how to taste. We talked about those components from history, a little bit of history, to climate and geography. Now it's time to get to the more technical aspects as to what all that means in the glass. So we're going to kind of walk through. So the very last page of notes that we had passed out is just, I didn't make this up. This is the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is the educational body that I chose to study through. Yeah, exactly. So here we go. Please wait to, oh yeah. That looks classy, I like it.
No one's flying. No flying.
City in America. First Spaniard
Please smell the person next to you, not smell them, smell their wine, and we'll get into this. Yes,
So hey guys, before we even taste, I want to walk through what they refer to, the Court of Master Sommeliers refers to as a deductive reasoning tasting sheet. This is really called like a blind tasting sheet or deductive reasoning taste, but really it's you want to pull apart, and you can pull apart. And for right now, I know that it's not a lot of information that you'll use tableside, maybe some of it you will, but let's walk through the 50 questions that you should ask yourself when evaluating wine at any time.
What's the name of this wine?
Well, that's what we're going to find out.
So everyone has found the deductive tasting sheet called Blind Tasting Grid, correct? Make sure you are on this page. This is in the packet titled Pier House Sparkling Wine. I know some of you are sharing that. Please share as well with this.
Which one? Did we have enough sheets to pass? Oh no, really? Yeah. I brought like 90 or 85 people. Oh no.
Lychee?
You know what happened?
Lychee.
It was like ran out of
What do you think of lychee? L-Y-C-H, the white lychee. But then they say lychee.
Yeah, I said lychee. Yeah, I have it here.
No
There's a
worries. As long
printer
as
here in the
everyone
business center.
Yeah, we can do it.
Ready to go.
When we're at lunch.
Oh, right on. Yeah. So, hey team, for those of you that don't have this, can you nuzzle up to your neighbor and just at least take a look? This is nothing that I expect you to memorize, but I think it's important because everything that we've kind of been talking about is going to show itself here. So I'm just going to really quick first. Oh, go ahead.
Let's get everything passed out.
Oh, right on.
That way there's less promotion. Everyone's trying to get situated.
Sure.
We don't have to nuzzle up. We have our own.
I think this should be the end of it. So everybody has one. Sheet you're sharing.
All right, Aaron, you're good.
Okay, yeah, we have literally 30 minutes to go over this. We'll wait to taste the wine if you don't mind, because I do want to just kind of walk through really quick a once-over as to what we're looking for, just so I don't keep talking over everybody while we're tasting. But this little sheet here, pretend like you don't know what this bottle is in. Is it Felipa?
Yes.
Yeah, Felipa just asked me, she's like, what wine is this? Perfect question, because let's say somebody hands you a glass of wine and you don't know what it is. this is what the idea of blind deductive tasting and blind reasoning is. If it's this color, it might not show like this, or if it's that weight in that color, it might not be that. You know what I mean? Like Cabernet Sauvignon is not the same color as Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a little bit more transparent because it has a lighter, thinner skin grape. So those kind of clues should give us an idea. I know that Liz is going through the court right now as well, but this is part of like 1/3 of the tasting is you get 6 wines and you have 24 minutes and you verbally in front of a panel walk through all of these questions. So this is a really, really cool thing to use, but it really also helps to just kind of pull out the properties. This is absolutely not how we'll talk about wine to the guest. At the very end, we can use like 2 sentences to describe this wine, but I want to use this as kind of the tester as to how you should at least, trust me, I'm not going to go through this with every single wine that we taste, but when I'm talking about acidity and tannin and sugar and alcohol and weight and mouthfeel and finish, this is what we're talking about. So Liz, anything to say there before I kind of get started with that?
Yeah, so one of your objectives here today is that you are learning and using, I want you to really brainstorm language to describe wine, okay? So imagine that you are the guest right now, and obviously I wouldn't sell you the wine like this, like, well, what do you smell? What are you tasting? But I want you to come up with a few adjectives for each part of this scenario where we are talking about what do you smell on the nose? What are some of those things? I want you to talk to each other. Okay? And when it comes to the tasting portion, I want you to think of all those other nuances that we talked about, where do you think it comes from? What kinds of things do you smell or taste? Any earth, any fruits, any wood, any citrus, any herbs. So all of those compounds we're going to discuss. But again, this is subjective, and the best way to taste wine is in a group. All right, using each other, because we all have a different amount of taste buds on our tongue, and we all have different experiences that we are coming with. Who all here has licked limestone? Exactly. So only some of us might even have that ability to use that word. Not that you have to lick limestone. That's not your homework. But just as an example, you're going to pull things from your experience to describe this wine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to walk through this quick once, and then we'll buzz through this wine here really quick first, but really broken into about 3 different parts before we come up with a conclusion. Let's just pretend like we don't know what this wine is. Some of us might know what this is and some might not, but just for fun. Literally, the first thing you do, obviously, look at the wine, and we all take that for granted, but it really matters. Is it straw yellow? Is it super clear? Is there sediment in it? Is there gas in it? Lighter wines tend to have higher acid, the lighter the color of the wine, because like in my head, I'm starting to think like if there's not a lot of color to a white wine, we're just going to go through white wine, but we would apply this to white and red wine. If it's light in color, I might be like, hey, this isn't probably from a warm climate area, because a warmer climate area that's closer to the equator might have a little bit more ripeness to it. It might have a little bit more alcohol to it, and sometimes people put oak on those kind of wines to help them soften on the palate and become more approachable. So you're going to look at the brightness of the wine. Is it day bright? Is it shimmering? Intensity, moderately intense. Clarity, obviously looking for anything from floaters in the wine to, is it murky? Does it look like it has a little bit of a leesy quality to it? It might be a wine that was in barrel for a long time with regards to color, but also maybe somebody that kind of stirred around what they refer to as batonnage, where they're kind of reinvigorating the yeast and the seeds and all of the solids that kind of float to the bottom of any vessel. And then sediments as well. Like sediment, if you find, like in red wine and you're looking at wine, you might see what looks like coffee grounds in the bottom of the glass. You might be like, oh, this wine might have a little bit of age on it, if you see that. Because what happens with all wines is this. White wines get darker with age. Just like when you bite into an apple and it starts to brown, it's oxidation. Red wines get lighter with age, for sure, because the grape skins make the color, the pigmented tannins join together and eventually fall out, which is what looks like chewing tobacco or coffee at the bottom of a bottle, which is one of the 3 reasons that you might decant a wine. You might decant a wine just for showmanship. It looks awesome. You can tell these people are having it's their anniversary or whatever it might be, a birthday party. Showmanship is really cool. It's an expensive bottle. You want to make it feel special. Also to separate the clean wine off the dirty wine, or also to aerate the wine. If wine needs like a lot of air really fast, the 2012 Nebbiolo that you're pouring by the glass, like that thing might need to breathe a little bit if somebody orders a bottle, because really wine basically is, you're trying to keep wine as long as possible in between grape juice and vinegar. It starts out grape juice, the fermentation is going to happen naturally, it's going to be vinegar by the end. So by putting a cork in that bottle and keeping oxygen off of it and that developmental oxidation that happens, like I just said, when you bite into an apple, you're trying to keep it wine as long as possible. It won't happen after about 50 years. It'll start very quickly turning to vinegar. So that's just very quick. You want to take a look. Obviously, like I said, with regards to Pinot Noir, it's going to be lighter in color than a Syrah. So if you're looking at something, I know I'm being a little bit too technical here, but you can tell a lot by looking at wine as to making some initial conclusions. I have to warn you, don't go down and be like, oh, I know what this is. Like, try to keep really objective and adding up. It's like you're writing, it's almost like a chalkboard and you're writing down all of your words. And then before you get to the end and you decide what it is, you have to look back and read it like a book and be like, does, Chardonnay taste, lean and like lime zest and steely and like wet hay? No, so I'm going to rule that out.
So before we go any further, let's all take a moment and I want you to compare with the person next to you. What color is this? Do you see two colors? Do you see one that's coming up on the rim a little bit? And do you see one that is the general color of it? Does it get darker or lighter as you go into the glass? Tilt it to the side, best to do over a solid surface, so against the black tablecloth.
Take a look right over something white.
Or against on the white piece of paper, you're going to get the best idea.
I would call this almost like brilliant, shimmering, day bright, pale, straw colored. And also if you look at the center of the glass to the rim of the glass, which is called the meniscus, the more variation from the center of the glass and that color to the meniscus might imply age as well.
The top of it looks lighter than...
Yeah, there's a little bit of variation from the center of the glass to the meniscus. For sure. And sometimes if you see little tinges of green around the outside, it could be chlorophyll. There's all sorts of visual clues here to just kind of consider.
Green can also imply it's a younger wine, possibly, so there's some hints that you're already getting by looking at it. Yes?
For the characteristics that we use it for young and from the meniscus to the outside of the crown.
Yeah, so the more variation in color from the center of the glass to the rim of the glass might imply more age. If it's a more consistent color all the way through, good chance that it's youthful, current vintage. But like I said, whites get a bit darker as they get older, so you'll notice more variation in color. And then reds as well. If it's bricky, literally reds can go into two different categories. Literally, they call it garnet or ruby. Yeah, if it's ruby, those are shades of like purple and black, youthful, pretty consistent color all the way through. But garnet is more like brick, sunset, orange, and that might imply two things. Either wine that has age on it. If you see more variation in color, it can mean age on it, or Italian wines really brick up fast too for some reason.
Let's focus back in on this wine. And yes, we will be tasting a red, so if you do have some more of those questions about red wines.
Sure, so let's smell it. Let's really give it a whiff. Get your nose in there.
Get your nose in there. Keep your mouth slightly open. That is going to help you with your smell. Okay, just like that. The farther you're away, you should start to smell something, and as soon as you come into that glass, you will start smelling something different.
Yeah.
We're looking for two different things.
The first thing that I always look for, and this is just how I'm trained, but first thing I'm looking for is this wine sound or not? Is it good? People who are bartending or people who are going to take wines out to the table, let's say it's your first table of the night, you have to determine, is this sound? Is it matterized? Is it corked? Is it oxidized? Has it been out for 2 days? So you have to decide quick with the nose, does this wine smell like it's supposed to, and take it out there. So this is what I do with white wines, just in my own head. Let's get into the few, F-E-W, fruit, earth, wood characteristics. The few, yeah. So this is what I do when I'm in my head. I don't say this out loud, but sometimes with white wines, I kind of know, is it going to be citrus fruits that I'm smelling? Is it going to be orchard fruits that I'm smelling? Is this going to be tropical fruits? Is it going to be stone fruits? Is it going to be exotic? So citrus fruits are obviously lemon, lime, orange, lime zest. Orchard fruits could be Granny Smith apple, Bartlett pear, Asian pear. Stone fruits, obviously, is it peach? Is it, and if it's peach, is it like peach pith? Or am I smelling canned peach? I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of start, just to grab a couple of words that you could say to somebody like, oh, it's got a real citrusy nose, really bright and expressive, and you don't want to get too much. I try to stay away from the fruit bowl descriptors a lot. If you're just like, oh, this smells like raspberry and cherry, blah, 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 and it's like, you don't know who you're going to run. So there's a couple of ways to talk about it. Either you're going to talk about the information of the wine, or you're going to talk about why you like it. Because I swear, this is what really matters, is people just want to know that you like it. If they're like, tell me what's good, and you're like, this for sure, and you give them that look, that's really what people want to know, is that you recommend what you're talking about. You know what I mean? You don't even have to know all the descriptions in the vineyard site, in the soils, though we will provide that information. So I kind of look at the fruit aspects. I might get like 2 or 3. What do we think here? If we were to break this apart into like citrusy notes, or orchard fruit notes, or exotic notes, or stone fruit notes. I mean, exotic notes would obviously like be guava and papaya and mango. What are we smelling here? Anybody just want to say 1 or 2 things?
Raise your hand. Mark, or John.
Getting a total citrus bomb.
Yeah.
Total citrus bomb.
Yeah.
What is one part of that citrus bomb you're getting?
Lemon, grapefruit.
Yeah,
Grapefruit.
awesome.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Who's next?
Absolutely.
Taylor.
I smell lychee. It smells like a lychee martini.
Like a lychee martini.
Totally.
So some of those tropical notes.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, another one. Fernando. No, I can't see your name tag, so I'm guessing Jose.
Yep. And pear and green apple.
Pears and green apples.
Yeah.
I see some nods happening.
I smell a slight floral note.
A floral note. Any idea, like what kind of floral are you smelling? Honeysuckle, jasmine, just white flowers? Are you smelling rose petals? White flowers?
Yeah, totally. Good call.
No, honeysuckle, maybe some elderflower.
Okay, so maybe some honeysuckles as well. This is excellent. Anybody else?
Vanilla.
Getting a little bit of like dry grass.
Dry grass.
I love this.
That is great. Like, almost like like you just ran over it with a mower, right?
Yeah.
Grass.
Sitting out for the sun.
Yeah. All right, these are great. Some mineral notes. Okay.
Yep.
Can you define minerality a little bit? Expand on that.
Maybe some limestone.
Some limestone, okay? So remember we talked about licking that wet rock?
Yeah.
Homework is to all find limestone. No. So you could say sea spray even, limestone, those kinds of things.
Does everybody know what limestone is, by the way?
Yes.
It's solidified. Okay, good. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. It's interesting because all limestone comes from fossilized sea matter at the bottom of all caves are made out of limestone. It is very porous. It goes away very, very quickly. But it's important that when you smell those limestoney things, they can really also be briny, salty even, and I would hesitate to use that word, tableside of course, but it can really be sea spray-esque, as Liz has said. So we've got a couple of great fruit descriptions already. The earth part of this absolutely is wet rock, limestone, that we'll circle back on that. How about wood here? First of all, is there an absence of oak? Is it low, medium, or high?
Low.
I would say none.
No.
Oak does this. Oak does this, and it can really hide itself. If there was oak on this, it would probably be a little bit of texture to it because oak is a flavoring agent for sure. American oak flavors wines. French oak frames the fruit, but also it can add color. It can add flavor. I mean, oak does a lot of things in between just being a storage vessel for sure.
For example,
so the sight of this and then the flavor of this texturally. I'm detecting an absence of oak. There might be a little bit.
For example, American oak, you're going to almost get like dill pickle notes to it. And French oak, you're going to get more baking spices, vanilla, things like that. Very characteristic of the differences in those oak. And then if it's new oak, you're going to get more of those flavors. If it's older oak, it's going to be a lot more subtle.
Yeah. Does anybody smell alcohol? I know this sounds like a really silly question, but does this smell like a pronounced alcohol? Sometimes what I do, don't ever do this outside of here, but sometimes I give just a little blow into the glass, and if it comes back and kind of burns my eyes, that could imply that, and then of course the aroma. I don't know that we can really smell alcohol, just like I don't know if we can really smell certainly granulated sugar, but it's something to think about. Any overt alcohol-y kind of rich? No, not really? Yeah, I would agree. So that might also lead me to start thinking about the old world, which I said is cooler climate, because California is a little bit warmer and might have a little bit more physiological ripeness. Because remember what I said, like sugar plus yeast equals alcohol. So the more sugar content, the warmer. They call sunshine in a bag. Basically with sugar. Like you can add, it's called chaptalization, you can add sugar to wine sometimes. We don't do it here in California because we don't need to, we're spoiled for sunshine. But in Europe, in places that struggle for physiological ripeness, you can literally put sugar right into the vat, which will turn into alcohol. It's pretty wild.
So far we've got maybe possibly young, right?
Yes.
From the color. We had a lot of citrus, maybe a little tropical, lots of minerality. So we're thinking cool climate, possibly older world. Ready to taste?
Yeah.
So everybody, when
I just
you're
want to go over
tasting-
the other ones though. Flowers and spices and other. We talked a little bit about floral notes, white flower notes.
Yes.
Honeysuckle, I totally agree with, for sure. So yes, absolutely. And then now let's taste.
So for the tasting, make sure that you're going to get this all in your mouth, because remember, your taste buds, you have your sweet in the front, you have your bitter on the sides. You want to get a full mouth feel, okay? So when you're tasting, it's okay to sound like this.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's immediately then go back to like the grid that we're talking about, like acidity, low, medium, or high? High, because it's really refreshing, really crisp, right? Brilliant.
Making you
I
salty
would
a little
agree.
bit.
How about sugar? Does this taste like it's sweet at all? Does it taste like there's any low, medium, or high? Low. None. Bone dry. I would say this is bone dry. There is such thing as white wine tannin. It almost is like the equivalent of like relatable like aspirin, baby aspirin on your palate. It has that kind of astringent kind of quality, as opposed to like red wine. It has a little bit more grip with its tannin and can make your lips stick to your teeth. That comes from the skin of the grape, both white and red. How about texture? Can we get this in our mouth again and just kind of see texturally where we're at? Is it viscous and unctuous and juicy and weighty and generous? Or is it lean and crisp and high-toned? I call those like high-toned fruit flavors. Can we confirm the fruits on the palate? The citrus that we were smelling, those subtle tropical notes that we were smelling. Yeah, so citrusy, maybe a little bit of whoever said pear or like young pear, green apple. No, Jennifer said green apple.
Sure.
I don't doubt that. Sure, go ahead. Yeah, that's perfect. Oh yeah, right on. And then wood, just to confirm, like the few, I always say remember the few, F-E-W, when you're just kind of tasting. We went over sugar, we went over acidity, and we're talking F-E-W, those fruit notes, confirmed. Earth notes, do we kind of taste, does this really taste steely or tanky or minerally? Is it, how do we feel about that?
A little bit of steel.
Yeah, steely. And then that goes right into the wood here. Wood flavors, which I said can come across as texture. We didn't see it on the color. We didn't really smell it either. But it also helps with oxidation of the wine. Do we detect any oak on the palate?
Not at all.
If we tasted like a pretty heavy, buttery oaky Chardonnay, which I know you all know well, you would be able to really tell, because really when you start tasting side by side, which we'll do later, the subtle differences become more overt, right? And then Liz also wanted to talk about, are there places on the palate that you feel, there's a real mixed bag here. Half of the science community feels that, saltiness is here and sweetness is here and acidity is there, and half of the science community, it's very difficult to understand, but can we talk about that a little bit, where we're detecting some of these flavors? Are they coming up through your olfactory senses in your nose?
Jonathan.
Right back here.
Right back here, what are you sensing right back here?
Tart.
So tart, is it making you salivate
Yeah.
a little bit? So if you get that kind of that brightness, that tartness, that minerality, next time you take a sip, lean forward a little bit. If you start to salivate, that's what we're talking about there. That's that higher acid, that really bright minerality.
Can we confirm some of the other things that we spoke of, from white flowers to any additional spices?
I'm getting some like cracked pepper.
Oh wow, so there is a little bit of spiciness too. Yeah. Anything else? No, pretty straightforward, pretty simple.
For those of you that were getting any of those fruit flavors, where were you getting that in your mouth? Right up here? Tip of the tongue, kind of this area. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
As far as like woody goes, I kind of got like some notes of cedar, not like super heavy on it. But.
Okay. Possibly some cedar.
It's like an apple aftertaste.
There's an apple aftertaste. Would you say it's a ripe apple, a tart apple? What kind? A tart green apple. Okay, very nice. Like a Granny Smith. Tart
Yeah.
green apple.
For sure. How about balanced? Does this wine seem to be balanced? Is the acidity? There's a saying that you don't have to know how to read music to tell when something's out of tune. You can tell when something's maybe a little angular or disjointed. Tannins, acidity, alcohol. Does it taste like it's of high quality? Does it taste like this is? Do you think this was the winemaker? Do you think this was the vigneron's intent? Is for this wine to taste like this? Maybe. Yeah. If you would you pay like $8 if you wouldn't think twice about it? But if you just had this at a restaurant, you would feel like this is a solid high quality wine or medium quality. Can we talk about quality? Low, medium, high?
Low.
Happy hour. Can we inch towards medium? Maybe. Great.
It's a good wine. It's a good wine.
Yeah. And then the finish, we already talked about the fruit flavors on the finish. Great. So then in the initial conclusion, before we get to the end conclusion, sorry, Liz, do you want to go into something there?
Oh, no, I was just going to point.
Oh, yeah. So the initial conclusion, if I did have a chalkboard and was writing all of these notes down, wet hay, citrus, a bit of white flower notes, a little bit minerally, high acid, bone dry, maybe cool climate, moderate plus quality. Those all of those adjectives, the more and more you taste and the more you use this deductive reasoning format, add up to something. Like you could hand me a card that says, hey, this is Sauvignon Blanc, and I'd be like, check.
Yeah.
Yes, this is Sauvignon Blanc.
Let's go through it really quick. We have a few minutes, yes?
Right on, yeah.
So initial conclusion. Does anyone want to take a guess? New World or Old World?
New World.
We'll go with the person that raised their hand.
New World.
New World, okay. Climate.
Cold.
Cooler climate, colder climate. Varietal. What kind of wine do you think this is?
Sauvignon Blanc.
Sauvignon Blanc, okay. Age range. How old do you think this wine is?
1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7.
1 to 3. Okay, excellent. We're almost there. Does anyone want to guess a country?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Bree?
I actually just had a question regarding the distinction between New World and Old World.
Okay.
Oh, that's something that I may not have voiced when we were talking about that, but the old world, Europe. That's where we've been making wine for the last 2,000 years. The new world, everywhere that's been colonized since then, that the Europeans have brought the vine. 500 years ago to South Africa, a couple hundred years ago to America. The Dutch down in South Africa, even though you think that's old world because you're like Africa, they call that new world because the Dutch settlements in South Africa. So Europe, everything that we were looking at that slide is considered the old world in wine speak. New world, everything else has been colonized after that by Europe.
South America, North America, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand. Those are all New World areas.
And again, just going back to climate quick, Europe is cooler. And I just mentioned that warm jet stream of air that comes from the Caribbean. So it doesn't make it warm there, it just makes it possible to physiologically ripen grapes because they have the best of both worlds. Warm days, sunny, Italy, and then cool nights, big 50-degree diurnal swings that, make for bracing acidity, shuts down the grape too so they don't get so physiologically higher alcohol, rich and dense. So these New World wines are planted in warmer climate than Europe. So that's a big distinction. It's almost like cool climate Europe, wines of finesse and beauty, warm, and I'm overgeneralizing because there's something, anybody could argue this to the end of the day with me and they would be right too. But the New World, warmer climate, higher alcohol, physiologically dense, maybe a little bit of oak on them too, because there's not a lot of wines that you want to put out with no oak on them, because to tame that alcohol and to kind of bring some balance to the wines, there could be some oak on them too. Although Europe uses lots of oak too.
Can you also break down the distinction for everyone? We have bone dry, dry, off dry. Let's kind of just like that.
Sure. Well, to me, I think we all agree this is bone dry. There's no physiological sugar, and I want to be really clear. Thank you, Patrick, for bringing that up, because even though we're talking about all of these fruits like citrus and apple and all this stuff, you don't want to give people the impression that things are sweet. I just spoke about how people have a real weirdness with regards to sweetness, so don't ever say sweet. Even if you were pouring a Riesling, off dry would be the terminology to use, because sweet that's a polarizing word for sure, and you don't want to take that gamble.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, dessert wine, right? 100 grams of sugar per liter plus is sweet. a couple grams, maybe off dry. And sometimes in Europe they leave a little bit of sugar, like in Germany, just to balance out that acidity, because sugar definitely helps to balance that acid. You might even not even realize there's sugar in there, but they're gonna balance that out for sure.
But also just to be clear,
off dry has a level of residual sugar.
Physical sugar, not fruit aromas.
Consider it sweet wheat, say it's off dry.
I mean, that would be a level of saying that there is a level of residual sugar.
Just to oversimplify, there's nothing off dry or sweet on your wine by the glass program, so everything's going to be referred to as dry. This I would call bone dry because it almost does have not an off-putting astringency, but something that makes me salivate and want some oysters.
the more you salivate, we're also talking about that acid component. That's dryness. Okay? So to be bone dry is something that really just clears your palate. There is nothing left there and you are salivating. Okay? And you can judge it by that every time you take a sip. And you don't need to do this all the time, but if you duck your head down slightly, see what's happening, what's going on in your mouth. That is your mouth reacting to the dryness of that wine. Okay, so if it is something that's off dry, it's probably not going to make you salivate as much. There's going to be nuances, things lingering there from the wine still. Dry is really kind of a cleansing, and then that salivating happening.
And with dry, the reason we went with that direction on our list is that really those wines go well with food.
They really do. So
I have to touch on that too. Wines of acidity. Europe, the Mecca, obviously they've had thousands of years literally to figure out what grapes work best on what hillside, and it goes with their cuisine. That's why European wines are so fantastic with food. They have acidity. It's slightly cooler than some of these New World areas. And I've always leaned on acidity to work with food, because you could have like champagne. It works just as well with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken as it does sashimi. It really does, because the bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's going to be the palate cleanser in between each bite. It's going to make you salivate. It's going to prepare you for that next bite of food. And sashimi, it's also going to be sitting. So especially if chef uses a lot of acid on the plates, you want to have the acidity in the wine as the backbone that kind of cleanses that palate off in preparation for the next bite.
So we won't be having any dessert wines?
Not today.
Not initially, no. Will not be. Before you guys get out of here, we heard a few comments. I just wanted to come back to that final conclusion.
Sure.
If we may. Since
yeah, no, let's wrap
kind of
it.
makes this tasting fun. Oh no, what happened? So I heard New Zealand as one country. Does anyone else want to give us an idea? What other country do you think this wine could be from? Oswaldo?
She's from Napa.
I think it's from, we'll say the U.S.
Yep.
for now. Filippo? Australia. And Moses?
New Jersey.
Yeah!
New Jersey. Okay, so U.S. again. All right. Well, should I move into?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. Sauvignon Blanc was absolutely correct, and I have to say, as a grape varietal, because nothing matters more, nothing affects the wine more than the grape varietal. Maybe secondarily is like man, and third is where it's planted or somewhere in that order. But this is Sauvignon Blanc. So nice job. Who said that? Holmes.
This is Sauvignon Blanc.
Boom.
Very nice. Excellent.
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent.
Sauvignon Blanc is always citrusy and high-toned and floral. It can smell like wet hay or fresh mown lawn. Somebody said grass, like dried grass. Killer descriptions. That's exactly how I would describe this.
This is an old world Sauvignon Blanc, so cooler climate. Remember how we talked about that? We had a little bit of that limestone and earth notes. This is from Bordeaux. So it is a French Sauvignon Blanc. It is a blend. There's a little Semillon in there, which might have thrown you off. But
yeah, for sure. But I do have to
think
say
all of
Bordeaux,
you have that Sauvignon Blanc feeling in your head. 2017 is called Hot Rion, and this will be one of our happy hour wines.
Yeah,
whoever said that, that's why I love so much.
Mr. IGT over there. Every time I see him in the restaurant, I'll be like, what's up, IGT? So that's exactly right. Sauvignon Blanc is really grown for the most part in the Loire Valley, where you'll find it in north central France, also in Bordeaux. No, it's not. We're kind of blinding that. That'll be next week. Yeah, but this is a white Bordeaux where by law it's got to be Sauvignon Blanc with a little bit of Semillon blended in. That's exactly how I would describe it. Refreshing, high-toned, crisp, bone dry with notes of lemon zest and white flowers and wet hay. And that's going way. People are gonna be like, stop, just bring it earlier. But what's more important than that fruitful descriptor is the fact that it's really refreshing. Sauvignon Blanc works beautifully with seafood, with oysters, as a porch pounder, where you're just like
This
throw
will
three
also
of these
go
down.
great with fried calamari. That
All day
acid
with the
will
citrus
just
on it?
cut the fat.
Yeah. So that's just real quick. We'll revert back to this a little bit. We won't do this with every single wine, but I just wanted to walk through. So I just want to touch base, and not to point this out, but if we're talking like New World is warmer climate, but we're talking about acidity and not pronounced alcohol and minerality, that screams Old World. New World would be more forward fruit flavors, dense, higher alcohol wines, maybe seemingly richer. Just want to kind of throw that out there as a comparison. And as we taste more and more, we'll be able to really nail that above and beyond ways to describe this, breaking apart New World, Old World, and quality and everything else.
So guys, this was a blind tasting. It is not in your packet, but you will be getting that information. So this was solely for you that objective, using that language, thinking about what are you smelling, what are you seeing, what are you tasting, and deductively figuring that out. So very, very good work.
Thank you.
Nice job.